The twin moons of Zerion Prime had been home to the Velathi for thousands of years. These beautiful creatures looked almost like living water. Their skin was clear and shiny, catching light in ways that made them seem magical. When they touched each other, they could share thoughts and feelings directly, mind to mind. No words needed. They were the galaxy's greatest artists and thinkers, creating poetry that could make entire worlds weep, and philosophy that changed how people understood life itself. But something terrible was happening to them now, Commander. Jinwoo Park stood on the bridge of his ship, the UES Horizon, staring at the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. The screens showed numbers that made his stomach turn. Thousands of Velathi were getting sick with something called the withering. It wasn't like any disease anyone had ever seen before. It didn't make them bleed or fever or cough. Instead, it cut them off from each other. Imagine never being able to touch another person again. Imagine being locked inside your own head forever, with no way to share what you're thinking or feeling. For the Velathi, who had shared minds for millions of years, this was worse than death. "Commander," Lieutenant Sujin Kim called from her station. Her voice was shaky. She'd been monitoring the emergency channels all day, listening to the desperate calls for help from Velathi worlds. "We're getting another transmission from their home planet." Jinwoo turned to the main screen as it lit up. The face that appeared made everyone on the bridge go quiet. Elder Thulara had once been one of the most beautiful beings in the galaxy. Her skin used to glow like moonlight on water. Now it looked grey and cracked like old stone. Her eyes, once bright with the shared wisdom of her people, were dim and— "Alone, please," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. "We have asked for help from everyone. The Zephyrian Empire told us they cannot risk their trade routes. The hegemony said we are too weak to be worth saving. The Crystal Collective won't even answer our calls anymore." She paused, and Jinwoo could see her fighting back tears. "They all say the same things: too dangerous, too expensive, too late. But we are dying, not just our bodies, but who we are. Our children are being born into silence. They will never know what it means to truly connect with another soul." The transmission showed scenes from Velathi cities. Once, these places had been alive with shared thoughts and emotions flowing between millions of minds like rivers of light. Now the Velathi walked alone through empty streets, each one trapped in their own head, unable to reach out to others. Families sat in the same room, but might as well have been on different planets. Jinwoo watched a Velathi mother trying to comfort her sick child, but without their telepathic connection, she couldn't feel what the child was feeling or share her own love directly. She could only hold the child and hope her touch still meant something. "The Galactic Council has voted," Elder Thulara continued. "They are putting a quarantine around all our worlds, no ships in or out. They say it's to protect everyone else, but we know the truth. They have given up on us. They think we are already dead." The screen went dark, leaving the bridge of the horizon in heavy silence. Jinwoo felt anger burning in his chest. He'd served in the human fleet for 15 years, fought in 3 wars, and seen plenty of hard decisions. But this wasn't strategy or politics. This was abandonment of an entire species. "Sir," Communications Officer Hyejin Cho spoke up quietly. "Command is ordering all human vessels to stay away from Velathi space. They don't want to anger the Council." Jinwoo looked around at his crew. These were good people who had signed up to explore the stars and protect humanity's interests, but they were also the kind of people who couldn't stand by and watch genocide happen in slow motion. "What are our current orders?" he asked. "Survey mission in the Outer Rim," Sujin replied. "We're supposed to map asteroid fields for mining companies." Jinwoo walked to the front of the bridge and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was dying alone, and the most powerful governments in the galaxy had decided it wasn't their problem. The Velathi had never hurt anyone. They'd spent their entire history creating beauty and wisdom. They'd shared their art and knowledge freely with anyone who asked. And now, when they needed help, everyone had turned their backs. "Change course," Jinwoo said quietly. "Sir?" The navigator, Minho Kang, looked confused. "Set course for Zerion Prime, best possible speed." "But Commander, our orders are to map rocks while people die." Jinwoo cut him off. "I didn't join the fleet to map rocks. I joined to do what's right." Sujin stood up from her station. "Sir, if we go there, Command will court-martial us. The Council might declare us pirates. We could start a war." Jinwoo turned to face his crew. He saw fear in their eyes, but also something else. Hope, maybe. Or just relief that someone was finally going to do something. "You're right," he said. "This could end all our careers. Hell, it could end our lives. Anyone who wants to transfer to another ship can do it when we reach the next station. No questions asked, no mark on your record." He paused, looking each of them in the eye. "But I can't live with myself, knowing we had the chance to help, and chose to look the other way. The Velathi trusted the galaxy to care about them, and the galaxy let them down. Maybe humans are just one small species in a big universe, but we're not going to be the ones who walked away." The bridge was quiet, for a long moment. Then Minho spoke up from his navigation station. "Course laid in for Zerion Prime, sir. We'll be there in 6 days." One by one, the rest of the crew confirmed they were staying. Jinwoo felt proud of them, and terrified for them at the same time. They were about to make the Galactic Council very angry, and the Council had ways of dealing with troublemakers. But as he watched the stars stretch into lines as they jumped to faster-than-light speed, Jinwoo knew they were doing the right thing. Sometimes being human meant standing up for others, even when nobody else would. Especially when nobody else would. Dr. Tantutanta. So Young Lee had been studying alien brains for 20 years. She'd seen neural patterns from dozens of different species, from the complex web-like thoughts of the spider creatures, from Arcturus, to the simple but beautiful wave patterns of the peaceful swimmers from the water worlds. But nothing in all. Her years of research had prepared her for what she found when the Horizon arrived at Zerion Prime. The scene that greeted them was heartbreaking. Thousands of Velathi had gathered in refugee camps on the surface of their own world, driven from their cities by the spreading withering. These camps weren't the organized settlements you might expect from such an advanced civilization. They were desperate, thrown-together shelters made from whatever materials the Velathi could find. So Young walked through the largest camp with her medical scanner, taking readings and trying to understand what was happening to these people. A young Velathi mother sat outside one of the shelters, holding her baby. The child couldn't have been more than a few months old, born after the withering began. "Hello, little one," So Young said softly, kneeling down beside them. The baby reached out with tiny fingers just like human babies did. But when So Young looked at her scanner, she saw something that made her heart break. The neural pathways that should have been developing for telepathic connection were dark, silent. This child would never know what it felt like to share thoughts with another being. The mother looked up at So Young with eyes full of pain. Through a translation device, she whispered, "She cries all the time. I think she knows something is missing. She reaches out with her mind, but there's nothing there. How do I tell my daughter that she's alone in a way her people were never meant to be alone?" So Young had to step away for a moment to compose herself. She'd seen plenty of medical tragedies in her career, but this was different. This wasn't just physical suffering. It was the destruction of what made a species who they were. She spent the next 3 days taking readings from hundreds of Velathi patients, young and old, recently affected and those who'd been suffering for months. Each scan told the same story, but it wasn't until she was looking at the data on the 4th day that she realized what she was actually seeing. "This can't be right," she muttered to herself, running the analysis program again. The results came back the same. She ran it a 3rd time, then a 4th. Each time the answer was identical and impossible to ignore. So Young practically ran through the medical tent to find Commander Jinwoo. He was talking to a group of Velathi elders, trying to coordinate the distribution of supplies that the Horizon had brought. When he saw her face, he immediately excused himself. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "The withering isn't a disease. It's artificial." Jinwoo followed her back to her workstation, where she had dozens of brain scans displayed on multiple screens. To anyone without medical training, they might have looked like abstract art, swirling patterns of light and color representing the electrical activity in Velathi brains. "What do you mean artificial?" he asked. So Young pointed to specific areas on the scans, her hands shaking slightly. "Look at these neural pathway disruptions. They're too precise, too targeted. A natural disease would cause random damage. Some areas more affected than others, different patterns in different patients. But this can't. She highlighted the affected areas across multiple scans. This is surgical. Someone or something is deliberately targeting their telepathic centers with laser precision. Jin Woo stared at the data, trying to understand what he was seeing. Are you saying someone is doing this on purpose? I'm saying this is genocide, not plague, So Young replied, her voice getting louder. Whoever is behind this knows exactly how Velathe brains work. They know exactly which neural pathways to disrupt to cut them off from each other while keeping them alive. This isn't random. This isn't natural. This is murder on a species-wide scale. The implications hit Jin Woo like a physical blow. If So Young was right, then the Galactic Council wasn't just abandoning the Velathe to a natural disaster. They were abandoning them to an enemy that was systematically destroying their ability to be who they were. Could it be a weapon? He asked. It has to be, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen. The delivery method is so subtle that it took me days to realize what I was looking at. It's probably been affecting them for months before they even realized something was wrong. Before Jin Woo could respond, the sharp voice of Communications Officer Hai-Jin Cho crackled over the intercom system. Captain, we've got incoming vessels. Multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. It's the Council fleet. They're ordering us to withdraw immediately. Jin Woo looked around the medical tent. Velathe children were playing a simple game with stones, their laughter the ooh. First happy sound he'd heard since arriving. Their parents watched from nearby, and for the first time in months, there was something other than despair in their eyes. There was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, someone in the galaxy still cared about them. An elderly Velathe approached Jin Woo. Through the translator, his voice was weak but determined. Commander Park, we know what you risk by being here. We know your people did not have to come, but you did come. You saw us when the rest of the galaxy chose to look away. Jin Woo felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The Council fleet was here to force them to leave. They probably had overwhelming firepower and the legal authority of galactic law behind them. His small ship couldn't possibly stand against them in a direct fight. But looking at these people, beings who had spent their entire evolutionary history connected to each other, now cut off and alone, he knew there was only one choice he could make. Hai-Jin, he called into his communicator. Send a message to the Council fleet. What should I tell them, sir? Jin Woo looked at the Velathe children, then at So Young's brain scans showing the deliberate destruction of an entire species' identity. He thought about the mother holding her baby, who would never know connection, and the elder who had thanked him for simply caring enough to show up. Tell them we're not going anywhere, he said quietly. Tell them that if someone is committing genocide against the Velathe, then humanity stands with the victims, not the bystanders. The tent fell silent. Everyone, human and Velathe alike, understood what this meant. They were about to defy the most powerful political body in the galaxy. There would be consequences, probably terrible ones, but sometimes Jin Woo thought being human meant standing up for what's right, even when the whole universe was telling you to walk away. The sight that greeted Jin Woo when he looked out at the stars around Zerion Prime was enough to make anyone's heart stop. 200 Council ships had arrived during the night, forming a massive wall of metal and weapons that stretched across space like a deadly net. Their hulls gleamed in the light of the system's twin suns, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a city. Admiral Zethkol's flagship was the size of a small moon, its weapons arrays glowing with barely contained energy. The hegemony had sent their best. Heavy cruisers, battleships, and carrier vessels loaded with fighter craft. This wasn't just a show of force. This was an armada built to crush any resistance completely. Against this overwhelming display of power, humanity had managed to gather exactly 15 ships. Most of them were small patrol vessels and research ships like the Horizon. The biggest was the destroyer Defiance, commanded by Captain Donghyun Choi, and even that was tiny compared to the Council's battleships. This is insane, muttered Chief Engineer Ye-Jin Park as she watched the tactical display. She'd been working non-stop for 3 days, trying to keep their small fleet running. Her hands were stained with grease, and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. We're like mice facing down elephants. Navigator Minho Kang, who had celebrated his 25th birthday just a week ago, stared at his instruments with wide eyes. He'd graduated from the academy with honors, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this. "Sir," he said, quietly, "they're jamming our communications with Earth. Even if we wanted to call for help, we can't." The bridge fell silent as everyone realized what that meant. Earth didn't even know they were here. If something happened to them, their families would never know why they'd died or what they'd been fighting for. Admiral Zethko's voice suddenly boomed across every communication channel, so loud it made the speakers crackle. "Attention, human vessels! You're in violation of Galactic Council Quarantine Order 7743. You have 30 minutes to withdraw from this system. This is your final warning." Jin Woo looked around at his crew. Lieutenant Soo Jin Kim was gripping her control panel. So hard her knuckles had turned white. Communications Officer Hee Jin Cho was barely breathing. These weren't hardened soldiers. They were explorers and scientists who had signed up to study the stars, not fight impossible battles. "Sir," Captain Choi's voice came through from the Defiance, appearing on the main screen. Behind him, Jin Woo could see his crew at their stations, all of them looking scared but determined. "What are your orders?" For a moment, Jin Woo didn't answer. He thought about the easy choice. They could withdraw, go back to Earth, and tell Command that they'd tried their best. No one would blame them for backing down against impossible odds. His crew would go home to their families. Minho would get his chance to explore the peaceful sectors of space he'd dreamed about. Yejin would see her 3 children grow up. But then he thought about the Velathi refugees on the planet below. The children who had been born into silence, the mothers who couldn't comfort their own babies, the elders who had watched their entire civilization slowly dying while the galaxy turned its back on them. "Open a channel to all ships," he said quietly. "Both fleets." Hee Jin's fingers flew over her controls. "Channel open, sir." Jin Woo took a deep breath. What he said next would determine whether they lived or died, whether they went home as heroes or criminals, whether the Velathi survived or disappeared forever. "This is Commander Jin Woo Park of the UES Horizon," he began, his voice carrying to every ship in both fleets. "We didn't come here to start a war. We're not conquerors or pirates or rebels. We're just people who couldn't stand by and watch genocide happen." He paused, looking out at the massive council fleet. "We came here because when an entire species cries out for help, someone has to answer. The Galactic Council decided that someone wasn't them. The hegemony decided it wasn't them. Every major power in the galaxy decided it wasn't their problem." His voice got stronger, more determined. "But we're humans, and being human means that when we see people suffering, we don't ask if it's profitable to help them. We don't ask if it's convenient. We don't ask if it's safe. We just help, because that's what decent people do." The communication channel was completely silent. 200 council ships and 15 human vessels, all listening to one man's words echoing through space. "Today, that someone is us," Jin Woo finished. "We're not leaving." For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then Admiral Zethkol's voice returned, colder than the vacuum of space. "So be it. All ships, open fire." The first shots came from the Council's heavy cruisers, beams of energy so bright they lit up the darkness, like artificial suns. The human ships scattered immediately, their captains following pre-planned escape routes that took them into the asteroid fields and debris zones around Xerion Prime. "Evasive maneuvers," Jin Woo shouted as the horizon shook from a near miss. "Use the planet's gravity to slingshot around their formation." The small human fleet moved like a school of fish, being attacked by sharks, darting between the massive council ships and using their size advantage to avoid the heaviest weapons. But they were still outnumbered more than 10 to 1, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time. That's when Dr. So-Young Lee's voice cut through the chaos of battle. She was calling from her makeshift laboratory on the planet's surface, and her words were tight with urgency and excitement. "Jin Woo, I've found something. The source of the withering, it's not from this system." "What do you mean?" Jin Woo asked, trying to concentrate on her words while the ship shook around him. "From weapons fire." "I've been tracing the signal patterns," So-Young explained rapidly. The weapon that's been attacking the Velathi telepathic centers. It's coming from an ancient probe buried deep in the asteroid belt. It's not Velathi technology, and it's not from any species in the Council. This thing is old, Jinwoo, really old. The implications hit him like a lightning bolt. If the withering was coming from some ancient weapon, then this wasn't a plague at all. It was an attack. Someone or something had been systematically destroying the Velathi people's ability to connect with each other. "Can you shut it down?" he asked. "Maybe," So Young replied. "But I'd need to get close to it. Really close." Jinwoo looked at his tactical display. The asteroid belt was right in the middle of the space battle, surrounded by Council ships that were trying to destroy them. Getting So Young there would be like flying into the mouth of a dragon. But if she was right, if they could stop the source of the withering, then maybe, just maybe, they could save the Velathi people and prove to the galaxy that this had never been about quarantine at all. It had been about genocide. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, not because of its size. The Council had fought bigger wars, but because of what it represented. 15 small human ships against 200 of the galaxy's most advanced warships, fighting not for territory or resources or political power, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The space around Zerion Prime quickly became a nightmare of explosions and debris. The human ships darted between the massive Council vessels like angry wasps, their small size the only thing keeping them alive against the overwhelming firepower pointed at them. But wasps, no matter how brave, cannot fight elephants forever. Lieutenant Ji-Hoon Nam was the first to die. The 23-year-old pilot was flying his small fighter through the debris field when a Council battleship's laser caught him. His fighter's cockpit was breached instantly, and as the air rushed out into space, his last transmission came through crystal clear. "Tell my mom I'm sorry I'm going to be late for dinner on Sunday." Those were the last words anyone heard from Ji-Hoon Nam. His fighter tumbled into the asteroid belt, just another piece of wreckage in the growing field of destruction. On the bridge of the horizon, Jinwoo watched the tactical display with growing desperation. Each blinking dot represented one of his ships, and those dots were disappearing one by one. The Council fleet was systematically hunting them down, using their superior numbers to corner the human vessels and destroy them. "Sir," Navigator Minho, Kang called out, his young voice cracking with stress. "The research ship Discovery just lost main power. They're drifting." Jinwoo watched helplessly as 3 Council cruisers closed in on the disabled human ship. There was nothing he could do. The horizon was barely staying alive itself, dodging energy beams that could vaporize them in seconds. The Discovery's captain, an older woman named Hai-Won Kim, came on the emergency channel one last time. "This is Captain Kim to all human vessels. We're done for, but we're not going quietly. All hands prepare for ramming speed." What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. The Discovery, her engines failing and her weapons offline, turned toward the nearest Council dreadnought and accelerated with everything she had left. The massive enemy ship tried to get out of the way, but she was too big and too slow. The collision lit up space like a second sun. The Discovery, small as she was, hit the dreadnought right in her main engine section. Both ships disappeared in a ball of fire that could be seen from the planet's surface. Captain Kim and her crew of 37 took a ship 10 times their size with them, but their sacrifice barely made a dent in the Council's overwhelming numbers. "Jinwoo!" Dr. So-Young Lee's voice crackled through the communications system, fighting through static and interference. She was somewhere in the asteroid belt, trying to reach the ancient probe that had been poisoning the Velathi mines. "I've reached the probe. It's definitely ancient technology, older than anything I've ever seen. Pre-Council, maybe pre-civilization. But I think I can shut it down." Jinwoo gripped his command chair as another explosion rocked the horizon. Through the bridge windows, he could see the twisted wreckage of the patrol ship Busan tumbling past, her crew of 12 lost forever. "How much time do you need?" he asked, knowing the answer would determine whether any of them lived through the next few minutes. 10 minutes, So Young replied, her voice tight with concentration. "Maybe less if I can figure out this control system. But I need 10 minutes to be sure." 10 minutes. Jinwoo looked at his tactical display. They had maybe 5 ships left that could still fight effectively. The Council fleet had barely been scratched. In 10 minutes, there wouldn't be any human ships left to protect So Young while she worked, but they'd come too far to give up now. Cheat. Vessels, Jinwoo broadcast on the emergency channel. This is Commander Park. Form up on my position. We're going to give Dr. Lee the time she needs, whatever it takes. The response came immediately from the remaining human ships. Captain Dong-hyun. Choi's voice was calm despite the chaos around them. Understood, sir. It's been an honor serving with you. The 5 surviving human ships, the Horizon, the Defiance, the patrol vessels Daegu and Gwangju, and the damaged research ship Jeju, formed a defensive line between the Council fleet and the asteroid field, where So Young was working. They were like 5 people standing in front of an avalanche, trying to hold it back with their bare hands. Chief Engineer Ye-jin Park's voice came over the intercom. Commander, I'm rerouting power from life support to weapons. We'll have about 20 minutes of air left, but our guns will hit twice as hard. Do it, Jinwoo replied without hesitation. Navigator Min-ho Kang looked up from his station, his face pale but determined. Sir, I've plotted ramming courses for all Council ships within range. When our ammunition runs out, I understand, Jinwoo said quietly. Thank you, Min-ho. The young navigator nodded and went back to his calculations. He was planning how to die effectively, and he was doing it with the same careful precision. He'd once used to plot peaceful exploration routes. The Council fleet came at them like a tidal wave of steel and fire. The human ships fought back with everything they had, their weapons blazing defiance against impossible odds. They knew they couldn't win. They knew they were all going to die, but they also knew that somewhere in the asteroid field, Dr. So Young, Lee was working to save an entire species, and that was worth dying for. The Daegu was the next to fall, overwhelmed by fire from 3 Council destroyers. Then the Gwangju, her captain ramming his ship into a Council carrier and taking out half their fighter squadrons. The damaged Jeju lasted another 2 minutes before her patched hull finally gave way. That left just the Horizon and the Defiance against nearly 200 enemy ships. Jinwoo, So Young's voice came through one more time, clearer now. I'm in the probe's control center. This thing is incredible. It's been broadcasting the withering signal for months, maybe years, but I think I've found the shutdown sequence. How much longer? Jinwoo asked, watching as the Council ships closed in for the final kill. 30 seconds, she replied. Just give me 30 more seconds. 30 seconds. Jinwoo looked around the bridge of the Horizon. His crew was still at their stations, still fighting, even though they all knew the end was coming. Lieutenant Soo-jin Kim was firing the ship's weapons as fast as they could recharge. Communications officer Hye-jin Cho was trying to coordinate with the Defiance. Engineer Ye-jin Park was somehow keeping their failing systems running through. Sheer force of will. These people had families waiting for them back on Earth. They had dreams and plans and futures that would never happen now. But they were here fighting and dying because they believed that some things were more important than their own lives. 15 seconds, So Young reported. The Council ships opened fire with everything they had, energy beams bright enough to blind filled the space around the 2 remaining human ships. The Defiance took a direct hit to her main reactor and disappeared in a flash of light. Captain Choi and his crew joined their comrades among the stars. 10 seconds. The Horizon shook. As her shields failed completely, the next hit would finish them. 5 seconds. Jinwoo closed his eyes and thought about the Velathi children on the planet below, waiting to see if they would ever know what it meant to truly connect with another being. Then, suddenly, everything changed. The probe went silent. Across the Velathi, homeworld, something miraculous happened. The grey, brittle skin of the withering victims began to shimmer again. Eyes that had been dim with isolation suddenly blazed with returned connection. For the first time in months, the Velathi could touch minds again, could share thoughts and feelings and the deep, wordless understanding that made them who they were. And when they did, when millions of Velathi minds reconnected all at once, something incredible happened in the space battle above their world. The ancient Velathi ships, dormant for months because their telepathic crews couldn't function, suddenly came alive with power that had been sleeping, waiting for this moment. The real battle was about to begin. The moment Dr. So Young Lee shut down the ancient probe, something magical happened across the surface of Zerion Prime. It started slowly, like dawn breaking after the longest night in history. The first sign was a young Velarthi mother in one of the refugee camps, holding her baby daughter, who had been born into the silence of the withering. Suddenly, the mother gasped. Her grey, brittle skin began to shimmer like water catching sunlight. For the first time in months, she could feel her daughter's mind, confused, frightened, but alive with the innocent wonder that only babies possessed. The child stopped crying and reached up with tiny fingers, and when mother and daughter touched, their thoughts flowed together like two streams joining a river. Across the camps, the same miracle was happening everywhere. Velarthi, who had been trapped in their own minds for so long, they'd forgotten what connection felt like, were suddenly able to reach out and touch the thoughts of their loved ones. Families that had been sitting in the same room but living in completely separate worlds were finally able to comfort each other again. Elder Thulara, who had looked so old and broken when she'd first called for help, stood up from her makeshift shelter and felt her skin begin to glow with returned health. Around her, thousands of voices joined together in a harmonic chorus that grew stronger by the second. The sound was beautiful beyond description. Not quite music, not quite singing, but something that touched the very soul of anyone who heard it. The harmony was so powerful it could be heard in space itself. Admiral Zethkol was standing on the bridge of his massive flagship, watching his sensors with growing confusion and alarm. "What is that sound?" he demanded of his crew. "Where is it coming from?" His science officer, a nervous creature with 6 arms, was frantically checking his instruments. "Sir, it's the planet. The entire planet is singing somehow. And sir, there's something else. The Velarthi ships that have been dead in orbit for months, they're powering up." The Admiral spun around to look at the main screen. Sure enough, dozens of Velarthi vessels that had been floating lifeless in space were suddenly coming alive with energy. But these weren't the same graceful, peaceful ships the galaxy remembered from diplomatic missions. Something had changed about them. "By the void," Admiral Zethkol whispered, as his sensors tried to make sense of what they were detecting. "They're ships. They're not just moving. They're doing something to space itself." The Velarthi fleet was unlike anything anyone had ever seen in action before. Their ships didn't just fly through space. They seemed to bend it around them, creating waves of harmonic energy that rippled outward like stones thrown into a calm pond. The energy interfered with the Council ships' targeting systems, making their weapons fire wildly off course. Worse, the harmonic fields were somehow disrupting the power flow to their weapon batteries. Commander Jin Wu, barely alive on the heavily damaged bridge of the horizon, watched in amazement as the tide of battle completely reversed. One moment his ship had been seconds away from destruction. The next, the massive Council fleet was stumbling around like blind giants, their weapons useless against technology they couldn't understand. Elder Thulara's voice suddenly filled every communication channel in the system, but this wasn't the weak, desperate whisper they'd heard before. This was the voice of someone who had found her strength again, clear and powerful enough to make the hull of every ship vibrate with harmonic resonance. "Admiral Zethkol," she said, and there was steel beneath the musical tones of her words. "You have fired upon those who came to help us in our darkest hour. You came here with overwhelming force to destroy beings whose only crime was showing compassion. You will withdraw from our system immediately." The Admiral, his massive flagship now drifting helplessly as its weapon systems failed one by one, tried to maintain his authority. "The humans violated quarantine protocols established by the Galactic Council. They endangered the entire galaxy." "The humans," Elder Thulara interrupted, her voice cutting through his protests like a sword through paper, "showed us what the galaxy had forgotten. That strength without compassion is meaningless. That true power comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves, not from abandoning them when they need help most." The harmonic energy from the Velarthi ships was getting stronger, and the Council fleet was finding it harder and harder to maintain basic operations. But the Velarthi weren't attacking them. They were simply making it impossible for the Council ships to fight back. You came here with 200 ships to force 15 humans to abandon a dying species, Thulara continued. Where is the honor? In that? Where is the strength? You are like adults bullying children and calling it victory. Admiral Zethkol looked around his bridge. His weapons were offline. His engines were barely functioning. Half his fleet was in the same condition, drifting helplessly while the Velathi ships surrounded them with fields of energy that made resistance impossible. But more than that, he was beginning to realize that he was on the wrong side of history. The humans hadn't come here to conquer or steal or cause trouble. They'd come because they couldn't stand by and watch genocide happen. And now, faced with the restored power of the Velathi, the Council fleet looked exactly like what they were: bullies who had tried to use superior numbers to crush compassion. All ships, the Admiral said quietly into his communicator, prepare to withdraw from the system. The Velathi ships escorted the Council fleet to the edge of Zerion Prime's gravity well, their harmonic fields ensuring safe passage but making the message crystal clear: they were not welcome here anymore. As the massive armada jumped away into faster-than-light travel, the space around the planet fell quiet for the first time in days. The battle was over. Humanity had won, though at a terrible cost. Of the 15 ships that had come to help the Velathi, only the badly damaged Horizon remained. Hundreds of good people had died, but their sacrifice had saved an entire civilization. 6 months later, the galaxy was a very different place. The Velathi, restored to full health and grateful beyond measure, had done something unprecedented. They shared their most advanced technologies freely with every species in the galaxy, but with conditions. Their harmonic healing technology could cure diseases that had plagued civilizations for thousands of years. Their communication systems allowed instant contact across impossible distances. Their energy sources could power entire worlds without any fuel at all, but they would only share these gifts with species that promised to use them to help others, never to harm those who couldn't defend themselves. Jin Wu stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Zerion station, a massive space facility that had become a symbol of cooperation between humans and Velathi. Through the transparent walls, he could see the gardens where human and Velathi children played together, their laughter mixing in the recycled air. Dr. So-Young Lee joined him at the viewing window. Her research into Velathi neurology had revolutionized xenobiology and earned her recognition throughout the galaxy. But more importantly, she'd become close friends with many of the Velathi families they'd helped save. The Galactic Council sent another message today, she said, watching a young Velathi child help a human boy who had fallen while running. They're asking for a formal alliance. They want access to Velathi technology. Jin Wu smiled. What did you tell them? That they'll have to ask the Velathi directly. This is their system now, their decision to make. She paused, then added with a slight grin, though I think Elder Thulara will say yes. Forgiveness seems to be another thing the Velathi are remarkably good at. Jin Wu nodded, continuing to watch the children play. The young Velathi had helped the human boy to his feet, and was now sharing her toy with him, their different species meaning nothing to their innocent hearts. Maybe that's the real strength, Jin Wu said quietly. Not the willingness to fight, when you have to, but the courage to do what's right when everyone else has given up hope. Above them, through the station's transparent dome, the stars shone a little brighter than they had before. The galaxy felt a little less cold, a little more like the kind of place where compassion could triumph over indifference, where the strong could choose to protect the weak instead of abandoning them, and somewhere among those stars the story was spreading. The story of 15 human ships that had stood against impossible odds, not for conquest or glory, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The story of a species that had been abandoned by the galaxy, but saved by strangers who refused to walk away. It was a story that would inspire others to be better, to choose compassion over convenience, to remember that true strength comes from lifting others up, not from leaving them behind. The galaxy would never be quite the same again.